happened back when I was in high school, maybe sophomore year. I was a pretty quiet kid, not exactly unpopular, but I definitely wasn't running with the main crowd. I had my 2 or 3 close friends, and that was enough for me. For whatever reason, I always found big groups of people kind of draining. So when this guy, Leo, invited me for a Halloween sleepover, I was honestly a little surprised. Leo was new to our school that year. He was one of those kids who was perfectly nice, but just sort of existed on the fringe, same as me. We had a couple of classes together and bonded over a shared love for old school horror movies. So I figured, why not? His house was way out on the edge of town, one of those older farmhouses set way back from the main road, surrounded by a thick line of woods. When my mom dropped me off, I remember she got this weird look on her face. She asked if I was sure this was the right place. The house wasn't run down or anything, just lonely. It was a 2-story place with dark siding and a porch that wrapped around the front. It just looked out of place, like it was from a different century. I told her it was fine, grabbed my sleeping bag, and waved as she drove away. Leo met me at the door. He seemed excited, way more energetic than he was at school. "My parents are out for the night," he said with a grin. "Got the whole place to ourselves." I thought it was a little odd they'd just leave him alone in this huge, isolated house, but I was a teenager. An empty house meant no rules, so I didn't question it. We dropped our stuff in the living room, a big room with old, heavy-looking furniture covered in sheets, like no one ever actually used it. That rubbed me the wrong way, just a little. He pointed to a steep, narrow staircase near the kitchen. "Just one rule, man," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "The attic door stays shut. My dad's got a bunch of old, fragile stuff up there, and he'd kill me if anything happened to it. So just don't go up there." I said sure, no problem. It seemed like a reasonable request. I figured it was just boring adult stuff anyway. The first few hours were totally normal. We ordered a pizza, gorged ourselves on Halloween candy, and started a horror movie marathon. We were halfway through some classic slasher film when I heard it. A faint, scratching sound. It seemed to be coming from directly above us, from the ceiling. I glanced up. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Leo didn't even look away from the TV. "Probably just a squirrel on the roof," he mumbled, his mouth full of popcorn. "This old house makes noises all the time." It didn't sound like a squirrel to me. It sounded slower, more deliberate. But he lived here, so I took his word for it. I tried to focus back on the movie, but the sound, however faint, had put me on edge. An hour or so later, I got up to use the bathroom. The bathroom was at the end of a long, dark hallway that led towards that steep staircase. As I walked past the base of the stairs, I got this freezing cold chill down my spine. I glanced up towards the second floor landing, which was completely dark, and I swear I saw a shadow move. It was quick, just a flicker of movement in the pitch black, but I saw it. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart starting to pound. "Leo?" I called out, my voice a little shaky. No answer. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, just staring into the darkness, listening. Nothing. Dead silence. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my eyes playing games on me because we'd been watching scary movies. It had to be. I hurried into the bathroom, did my business, and practically ran back to the relative safety of the lit living room. When I sat back down, Leo looked over at me. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." I let out a nervous laugh. "I don't know, man. I thought I saw something at the top of the stairs." He just rolled his eyes. "Dude, it's the shadows. I told you, this place is old." His reaction felt dismissive, almost annoyed. It didn't make any sense. If my friend thought they saw an intruder in my house, I'd at least be a little concerned. But he just seemed irritated that I was breaking the mood. I dropped it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and I was trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It's moments like that, when you're frozen by fear, that stick with you forever. And honestly, it's why stories like these need to be told. If you agree, and you want to hear more experiences that will keep you up at night, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. It lets me know you're out there listening. Also, let me know in the comments if you've ever had a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. We finished the movie, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. By the time we decided to call it a night, I was a wreck. We laid our sleeping bags out on the living room floor. Leo was out like a light in minutes, but I just lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening. For a long time, there was nothing. I must have started to drift off, because the next thing I knew, I was awake. It was that specific kind of awake where you don't know what woke you, but you know something did. And then I heard it again, not scratching this time. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping, and it was coming from upstairs. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, steady, and undeniably inside the house. That's when it hit me. That was the point of no return for my sanity that night. Leo could explain away a scratch on the roof or a shadow in the dark, but there was no explaining this. This was real. I quietly unzipped my sleeping bag, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the zipper. I had to know what was going on. I crept over to the bottom of the stairs, my every step carefully placed to avoid making a sound. The thumping had stopped, but now there was a different sound, a low, guttural humming. It was coming from the second floor. I started up the stairs, one agonizingly slow step at a time. Each creak under my weight felt like a gunshot in the dead, silent house. When I got to the top landing, I could pinpoint where the humming was coming from. It was from behind the attic door at the very end of the hall. The door he'd specifically told me not to open. And that's when I saw it. The door wasn't fully closed. It was cracked open, maybe just an inch, and a thin sliver of pale, flickering light was spilling out from the gap, along with a smell. It was a horrible, sickly sweet smell, like rotten meat and cheap air freshener. Leo had lied. Someone was up there. My survival instincts were screaming at me to turn around, to run out of that house and not look back. But a stupid, morbid curiosity took over. I tiptoed to the door, my breath caught in my throat. I peered through the tiny crack. The attic was lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a wire, swinging slightly. In the middle of the room, there was an old metal bed frame with a thin, stained mattress, and someone was sitting on it. It was a man, or what looked like a man, incredibly pale and thin, with long matted hair. He was hunched over, wearing nothing but filthy shorts, and he was rocking back and forth, humming that horrible tune to himself. That's when I saw the chain. There was a thick, rusty chain bolted to the floor, and the other end was locked around his ankle. I felt like my insides had just fallen out of my body. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, and my shoulder bumped into the wall with a soft thud. The humming stopped. Everything went completely silent. And then I heard a voice from behind me, cold and flat. "I told you not to go up there." I spun around. It was Leo. He was just standing there at the top of the stairs, holding a damn baseball bat. His face was blank. There was no emotion, no recognition, nothing. It wasn't the kid from my science class. The time for sneaking around was over. I didn't say a word. I just shoved past him and booked it down the stairs. I heard him right behind me, his footsteps heavy and fast. I didn't even grab my stuff. I fumbled with the lock on the front door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I could hear him shouting my name, but it sounded distorted, angry. The lock finally clicked open, and I threw the door open and ran out into the freezing night air. I didn't stop running until I hit the main road, my lungs burning. I hid in a ditch by the side of the road and called 911. When the police showed up, I told them everything. They went to the house, but about 20 minutes later, they came back and told me the house was empty. They said the parents were home, that they'd been asleep and hadn't heard a thing. They checked the attic. Nothing. No bed, no chains, no man. Just some dusty old boxes, exactly like Leo had said. They looked at me like I was a crazy person, like I was some kid who had watched too many horror movies and let his imagination run wild. I never spoke to Leo again. The following Monday, he wasn't at school. His family moved away less than a week later. No one knew why or where they went. I'm not a kid anymore, but I still have nightmares about that night. I don't know who or what was in that attic, but I know it was real. And I know that for a few terrifying hours, I was in a house with something that wasn't supposed to exist, and with a boy who was helping to keep it hidden. I'm in my late 20s now, with a mortgage and a 9-to-5 job, and it's safe to say my days of sleepovers are long behind me. But this happened when I was 13, an age where a Halloween sleepover at your best friend's house was basically the social event of the season. My friend Mark and I had been planning this for weeks. We weren't party kids. We were more the type to see who could eat the most candy and stay up the latest watching horror movies. Mark lived in one of those new, cookie-cutter housing developments on the edge of town where every house looked exactly the same. They were nice houses, but they had zero character. They were the opposite of a haunted house, which, for whatever reason, made what happened even more unsettling. I got to his place around sundown on Halloween. We dumped our stuff in the finished basement, which was our designated zone for the night, complete with a big TV, a video game console, and a mini fridge stocked with soda. As we were setting up our sleeping bags, I noticed a new decoration on a shelf behind the TV. It was a jack-o'-lantern, but not a real pumpkin. It was one of those ceramic ones, probably something you'd find at a craft fair or a thrift store. It was lumpy and clearly handmade, painted a faded, sickly orange. But the thing that freaked me out was its face. The eyes were just triangular slits, but the smile was carved way too wide, stretching almost ear to ear in this grotesque, unnatural grin. It was just off. "Where'd you get that creepy thing?" I asked. Mark shrugged. "My mom got it at a garage sale. She said it had character. I think it's cool." He seemed to genuinely like it, but I can't lie, it just rubbed me the wrong way. The way the shadows hit it made the smile look like a sneer. I figured it was just me being a wimp, so I tried to put it out of my mind. The night started off great. We played video games until our thumbs were sore, then started in on the horror movies. It was probably around 1 a.m., deep into some cheesy zombie movie, when I heard a noise from the other side of the room. It was a faint scraping sound, like pottery being dragged across a wooden shelf. I looked over, but it was dark over there. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Mark, glued to the screen, just shushed me. "It's the best part," he whispered. I listened for another moment. Nothing. The house was brand new. It wasn't one of those places that creaked and groaned. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably the ice maker upstairs or something. A little while later, the movie ended, and we decided to turn in. Mark was asleep in about 30 seconds, but I was still wired from the sugar and the scary movies. I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling. After maybe 20 minutes of total silence, I heard it again. Scrape. It was louder this time, slower. I sat bolt upright and squinted into the darkness towards the shelf. In the faint glow of the TV's power light, I could see the outline of the shelf. The jack-o'-lantern was gone. My heart damn near stopped. I fumbled for the small flashlight I had in my bag and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the room. I found it on the floor, about 5 feet from the shelf, lying on its side. It looked like it had just fallen. I woke Mark up, whispering his name until he finally stirred. "Dude," I said, my voice shaky, "your creepy pumpkin fell off the shelf." He was half asleep and completely annoyed. "What? Just put it back," he mumbled, and immediately rolled over and started snoring again. It didn't make any sense. It was a heavy ceramic thing. It couldn't have just been vibrated off the shelf by the movie. But what other explanation was there? I got up, picked it up. It felt cold, unnaturally cold, and put it back in its spot. I made sure it was pushed way back against the wall this time. There was no way it could fall again. I got back in my sleeping bag, my mind racing, but eventually exhaustion won and I fell asleep. That's when the real nightmare began. I was woken up by a feeling, the feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes slowly. The basement was pitch black and silent, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very core, that I wasn't just imagining it. This was the point of no return. I didn't dare move a muscle. I just shifted my eyes to the side towards the floor next to my sleeping bag. And I saw it, the jack-o'-lantern. It was right there, inches from my head. It was sitting upright, and its horrible, grinning face was pointed directly at me. I swear to God, my heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed with a fear so intense it felt like my whole body had turned to ice. How did it get there? It was across the room, on a shelf, The moonlight wasn't reaching the basement, but somehow, in the oppressive darkness, its features seemed more defined, the smile wider, the empty eyes deeper. And then I heard it, a sound from inside the ceramic pumpkin, a soft, wet, clicking sound. That's what finally broke me. I let out a choked sort of gasp and threw myself backward, scrambling away from it. The movement made a noise, and that's when I heard Mark stir. "What the hell?" he mumbled from his sleeping bag. I didn't answer him. I was still staring at the jack-o'-lantern, expecting it to lunge at me. "Dude, what is wrong with you?" Mark said, his voice closer now. He was sitting up. I finally found my voice. "The pumpkin," I whispered, my voice trembling. It's right here." There was a long pause. Then Mark's voice, quiet and strange, said, "What are you talking about?" "It's on the shelf." I tore my eyes away from the floor and looked at him. I couldn't see his face in the dark, but his silhouette was sitting up, pointing towards the TV. I followed his hand with my eyes, and my blood turned to ice. He was right. The ceramic jack-o'-lantern was sitting on the shelf, exactly where I had put it. I instantly connected the dots. If it was on the shelf, then what was the thing on the floor next to me? My head snapped back to the spot beside my sleeping bag. The floor was empty. It was gone. I started hyperventilating. Mark flicked on the lamp next to him, and the room was suddenly bright. "Dude, you were having a nightmare," he said, but he looked freaked out too. "You were just staring at the floor." I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the pumpkin on the shelf, then back at the empty spot on the floor. I think he saw the genuine terror in my eyes, because he didn't try to tell me I was dreaming again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I made him keep the light on, and I just sat there, staring at that ceramic monster, until the sun came up. I called my mom and made her pick me up the second it was a reasonable hour. I never told Mark the last part about the clicking sound, or the fact that I saw it in 2 places at once. How do you tell your best friend that? He ended up throwing the jack-o'-lantern in the trash a few days later. He said it just gave him the creeps. We never talked about that night again, but I still have nightmares. Sometimes I'll wake up in a cold sweat with that clicking sound echoing in my ears, absolutely certain that if I look down at the floor next to my bed, I'll see that horrible smiling face staring back at me. I'm a graphic designer now, living in a small city apartment, but this story takes place a long time ago. I must have been about 12, back when Halloween was the most important night of the year. My best friend, Sarah, and I had been planning our costumes for months. We were going to be a vampire and a werewolf. Super original, I know. Her mom always threw the best Halloween parties, and the plan was for me to sleep over at her house afterwards. Sarah's house was perfect for Halloween. It was this big, older Victorian-style home with a sprawling, slightly overgrown garden and a porch that creaked in all the right ways. It was the kind of place that looked genuinely haunted in the October twilight. I loved it. I got dropped off late in the afternoon on Halloween, my duffel bag and sleeping bag in hand. Sarah met me at the door, already in her vampire getup, complete with plastic fangs. Her parents were busy setting up for the party, so we had the run of the house for a few hours. We were up in her room, putting the finishing touches on my werewolf makeup, when I first noticed it. On her dresser, propped up against a jewelry box, was a small, hand-carved wooden mask. It was dark wood, polished smooth, but the features were rough and almost tribal. The eyes were just 2 hollow slits, and the mouth was a carved, downturned line. It was small, maybe the size of my palm. It was the kind of thing you'd see in a museum, not a teenage girl's bedroom. "What's that?" I asked, pointing with my makeup sponge. Sarah glanced over. "Oh, that old thing? My grandpa brought it back from a trip somewhere in South America, like ages ago. He said it was a spirit mask or something, supposed to ward off bad things." She said it so casually, but for whatever reason, the mask just rubbed me the wrong way. The empty eyes seemed to be staring right at me. I figured it was just the Halloween mood getting to me, so I tried to shake it off. The party was a blast. We ate way too much candy, told ghost stories in the backyard, and generally acted like the dumb 12-year-olds we were. By the time the last parent had picked up their kid, it was almost midnight, and Sarah and I were exhausted. We went up to her room, changed into our pajamas, and collapsed into our sleeping bags on the floor. Her parents said their goodnights, turned off the hall light, and we were left in the dark, with just a little bit of moonlight filtering through her window. We talked for a while, whispering and giggling about the party, but eventually, we both started to drift off. I was in that hazy place right between being awake and being asleep when I heard a soft thump. My eyes snapped open. I lay perfectly still, listening. The house was dead quiet. I told myself it was just the old house settling, or maybe a branch tapping against the window. I closed my eyes again, but a few minutes later, I heard it again. Thump. This time, it was clearer. It sounded like it came from right inside the room. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to beat a little faster. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out the shapes of the furniture in the room. I looked over at Sarah's dresser, and that's when my blood ran cold. The little wooden mask wasn't there. I scanned the room, my eyes darting around in the dark. I couldn't see it anywhere. It didn't make any sense. There was no way it could have just fallen off. It had been propped up securely. I whispered Sarah's name. She just mumbled something in her sleep and rolled over. I laid back down, trying to rationalize it. Maybe Sarah had gotten up and moved it while I was half asleep. Maybe it fell and rolled under the dresser. There had to be a logical explanation. But no matter what I told myself, I couldn't shake the creepy feeling that had settled deep in my stomach. I spent the next hour just lying there, tense, listening to every creak and groan of the house, my eyes fixed on the empty spot on the dresser. I must have eventually fallen into a restless sleep, because the next thing I knew, I was being jolted awake by a noise. It was a scratching sound, a light scraping noise, like fingernails being dragged across a wooden floor. And it was close, damn near right next to my head. This was the point of no return. The moment where every rational thought flew out the window and pure primal fear took over. I was too terrified to move, too terrified to even breathe. The scratching continued, moving slowly, deliberately, around the edge of my sleeping bag. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop, or for it to be a dream. But it was too real. The sound was so distinct. After what felt like an eternity, the scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. A thick, heavy silence that was almost worse than the noise. Slowly, I forced myself to open my eyes. I turned my head just an inch, just enough to see the floor beside me. And there it was, the mask. It was lying on the floor, maybe a foot from my face. But it wasn't just lying there. It was facing me. Those two empty slits for eyes were staring directly into mine. I felt a scream building in my throat, but it was like my vocal cords were paralyzed. I couldn't make a sound. I was completely frozen. And that's when it clicked. The scratching. It wasn't fingernails. It was the rough edge of that wooden mask being dragged across the floorboards. My mind just broke. I scrambled backward, kicking myself free of my sleeping bag, and crab walked across the room until my back hit the wall. I started screaming, just raw, panicked screaming. Sarah shot up in her sleeping bag, completely disoriented. "What? What's wrong?" she yelled. I just pointed, my hand shaking uncontrollably, at the floor next to my sleeping bag. She flicked on the lamp on her nightstand, flooding the room with light. We both stared at the spot I was pointing at. The mask was gone. It wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere on the floor. We looked around the entire room, under the bed, behind the door. Nothing. I instantly connected the dots. It had to be back on the dresser. I looked over, my heart pounding in my chest. And there it was, sitting on her dresser, propped up against the jewelry box, exactly where it had been before, like it had never moved at all. Sarah's parents came running in, woken up by my screaming. I tried to explain what happened, about the thumping and the scratching and the mask being on the floor right next to my head. I sounded insane. I know I did. Sarah, who hadn't seen any of it, just looked confused. Her dad picked up the mask, turned it over in his hands. "It's just a piece of wood, kiddo," he said gently. "You probably just had a nightmare." They tried to calm me down, but I was hysterical. There was no way I was staying in that room, in that house, for one more second. I called my parents at 3 in the morning, sobbing into the phone, begging them to come and get me. They did, of course. My mom told me later she'd never seen me so terrified in her entire life. My friendship with Sarah was never quite the same after that. It was too awkward. How do you explain to your best friend that you think her grandfather's souvenir is possessed? Looking back, I still don't have an explanation. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. It wasn't a dream. That house was old, and I don't know why, but I think on that Halloween night, something old woke up.